we really do appreciate your presence here this afternoon for our second lunch forum. We are tackling during Missions Emphasis Week the theme of people on the move, mission and migration. As you heard this morning, we looked at a host of these really interesting Old Testament narratives through the eyes of an immigrant. You see things differently. You do see things differently. And this is one of those issues the church has quietly been involved with, but too often too quietly involved. And so we just thought a forum on immigration. We're going to pick up this theme in a number of other ways this coming year. But we've got a really distinguished panel to help share some more reflections with us on the nature of the task and the importance of the church thinking about these matters carefully and faithfully and courageously. And so I'm going to ask three of our panelists, the fourth one, all four are here, okay, to come on up. I'm going to just briefly say names and where they're from, but let them mostly introduce themselves and a little bit maybe as to why this issue of immigration is so important. You know Danny on the far end, Danny Carroas from Denver Seminary, and Damaris Velasquez from Boston, very much involved in the immigration issues at the public policy level, herself a Guatemalan and very invested in this issue from the angle of the immigrant. Samuel Tsoi, also a New Englander, has worked much with the issues of refugees and a passion for people that do migrate across cultures. And Ruth Melkonian Hoover right in the middle here from Gordon, right next door, whose area of research specialization actually is immigration and has worked on these issues both at the academic level but also at the public policy level in a global context. And so maybe I might just start with Damaris. Just say a little bit more what brings you here to this issue, and maybe a little bit more of introduction, and then I'll let Dr. Padilla moderate the rest of the session. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here and share this panel with these great people. I'm Damaris Velasquez. I'm originally from Guatemala. I've been living in the Boston area for 23 years. So I consider myself a true Guatemalan, but also a true American. I have learned to love and respect this nation. And I'm the director of programs and co-founder of a ministry called Agencia Alpha, which is a social ministry of Lion of Judah. I believe I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later, but this is who I am.
So, Ruth Melkonian Hoover, a political scientist. I've actually been focusing on the mobilization of evangelicals on this question of immigration and trying to understand historically when and why they have and haven't been engaged on this particular question, and why they are much more so today and playing a very particular role, particularly at the national level. So I became interested in this as I was writing an op-ed in the last go-around, 2006-2007, at the attempt of immigration reform, and then came to explore more fully why evangelicals, many of them were silent on the issue at that time.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Samuel Choi. I was a student at Gordon College, and that's where I studied international relations, had a heart for what's going on around the world. And when I was looking for jobs and trying to make my way into post-college career, this issue kind of just came into my lap. God kind of brought me into working on this issue from an advocacy standpoint and now on a policy standpoint within state government. And most importantly, I am a son of immigrants, and I immigrated here myself when I was really young. So I'm one of those, what they call 1.5 generation Chinese American, and I attend a church that very much reflects the makeup of the immigrant community in Boston and Massachusetts as a whole, where we have congregations that speak 3 different languages, that have multiple worship services that reflect different styles of worship. And so I am very much part of this community and have the privilege to work on this issue on behalf of the community as well.
I'm Danny Carroll Rodas. I'm half Guatemalan, tengo una paisana there at the end. I got into this just with people at the seminary and then going to an Hispanic church, and wanted to ask what the Bible had to say about this, and so that began a journey about 8 years ago, and the journey continues. So thank you for having me here.
Thank you. As you can see, a very distinguished panel with various experience of with immigration, both personally and well, all personally in some form of other. I too, I am an immigrant, an unusual kind. Puerto Ricans are the only U.S. citizens that they move from one state to the other. We're classified as an immigrant. Rather unusual, but we're very proud of that because we still remain Boricuas. That's our name for ourselves, by the way. But as we engage this theme, one of the things that I really want to focus on your own history, your own personal involvement, and as you think about this issue of immigration, what biblical imagery or, I would say, word best describe your involvement? In other words, I look at it, what biblical passage motivates us? What biblical image motivates you to be so actively engaged in this question where so many, as Ruth mentioned, are so silent? Damaris?
I can say that to start with, obviously, me as an immigrant, I came 23 years ago with my family. I was 17 years. Yes, I'm 40 years old, and I'm very proud of that. I was 17 years, and you can just imagine how it was when you were 17 trying to understand who you are as it is. Forget about moving to another nation, not knowing the language. I based what I do on the call that God gave me when I was 17, when He told me what was my identity, when I understood my identity in Christ, not as a Guatemalan young woman who was 17 years old and afraid, not as a person who was seeking for a social security number, but as a Christian. Once I understood that, I remember reading the passage. There were many passages, but one that I can tell you that really marks my life is Isaiah 61, 1-3, where it says that the Spirit of God is upon you, and He gives you the power to set free those who are captive. He gives you the power to bring good news. That is when, once I understood my identity, I was able to then say, this is who I am, no matter where I move. You have a chicken in China, you bring it to the U.S., it's a chicken. The identity does not change, even if it doesn't have a social security number. So with that, I understood the meaning of immigration, and I understood the meaning of what to do as an immigrant and what to do as a country probably that has to welcome immigrants. My friend and I founded Agencia Alpha, and it was just an idea of helping people to communicate, because language is a huge barrier when you move to another country. And I know that I speak with an accent, but I always tell people, I speak with an accent, but I don't think with an accent, and I don't act with an accent. So we developed this ministry, which 11 years later, I can tell you, we serve over 65 countries on immigration issues in Boston. I'm not talking that we travel around the world. In that small office in Line of Judah in Agencia Alpha, we see 65 countries every year. And we deal with 5,000 cases every year. Immigration reform is an issue that needs to be talked about. If I'm talking about those numbers only in the Boston area, you can just imagine in the nation.
Thank you.
So I am also a child of immigrants, and I grew up in an immigrant community in the San Joaquin Valley in California. And so it has always been kind of an issue and an area of concern. And then in college, I was very concerned about the flow of Central American refugees and immigrants that were coming into California because of the conflicts there. And I was particularly concerned with the U.S. government's role in perpetuating perhaps some of those conflicts, and then the reason, contributing, of course, to this question of migration. So I think for me, even at that time, I mean, Micah 6:8, right? What does the Lord require of you, right? But to do justice and love mercy and walk humbly with thy God. And so as a person very interested in politics and as a political scientist thinking about what is kind of the best approach that the government ought to take to do justice in this regard. And so that's been a constant theme for me.
Thank you.
Just one thing to add, echoing the themes of identity. Obviously, growing up here as an immigrant, I struggle with that in terms of who am I really? Am I a Chinese person? Am I American? But being a Christian and growing up in a church, I was encouraged to be taught very often, very consistently, that I'm the citizen of the kingdom, and that's first and foremost my identity. And that's how I approach my work, how I approach my calling. And also, I know within the immigration debates and among evangelicals, among people of faith, we're always trying to reconcile between, on one hand, in Old Testament, Leviticus calling us to welcome the stranger, and on the other hand, Romans 13, obeying the authorities and existing laws. And how do we reconcile that? I'll leave it to Ruth and Dr. Carroll for that. But for me, I always come back to the parable of the Samaritan. That's where Jesus, again, very cleverly, very wisely responded to someone who's trying to trick him. Who's my neighbor? And Jesus obviously told that parable, and it still applies to many settings, and particularly for immigrants. The Samaritan didn't ask that person's ID or passport. He just helped them. And it's also an indictment to those who passed alongside him and didn't do anything, many of whom are religious folks. And so I always come back to that parable and seeing how that applies today and where I fit, and am I being a good neighbor first and foremost.
I would echo everything the others have said. I guess the thing that's been interesting for me is immigration legislation. And so that has driven me to look at Old Testament law and how Old Testament law might inform our present legislation discussions. And I think there's a lot to learn from Old Testament law. So I would think that would be my main interest. Though what I've worked on covers the whole Bible, I think that's one particular issue we need to get to, and so this is where the Bible especially needs to inform us.
Thank you. Now, there's two institutions, higher learning, presented here, Gordon College and Gordon-Conwell, describe ourselves as broadly evangelical. Obviously, we cover a whole gamut evangelical world, which we may differ, obviously, in how we view the issue of immigration. So I'd like to explore, in your personal experience, what has been the reaction of evangelical and evangelical churches towards the issue of immigration reform. Ruth alluded to a little bit, but in your personal, what do you see the common reaction of the evangelical movement and the evangelical church in particular?
I have to say that I'm really happy to see that the evangelical church is moving forward on favor of immigration reform. I've been doing this work for 11 years, which is very short when you think about people that I meet in the community that have been doing this for 20, 30 years. So we're still in diapers, but we have seen the change. I remember going to a forum where my friend Patricia was speaking, and a pastor stood up in the middle of the forum and said, all I want is all those immigrants out of this nation. I don't want them to take my land. To the point of now that we are here that at the national level, evangelical leaders at the national level are getting organized and are asking for immigration reform. For me, that's a huge step. But now, again, if you ask me about the immigrant church, I can tell you that the immigrant church has been praying for this since day one they arrived to this nation. So when you talk about the church, you have to also understand which part of the church are we talking about. Is this the part that is the church that is being here? With a lot of respect, I say this, that probably needed to finally see something happening on the streets or something that is hitting them personally to say, oh, we have to react. Or the church that came from different countries of the world and was sent to the U.S. to somehow evangelize the U.S. again. And that church has been very active.
So certainly amongst evangelical leaders and a lot of traditional evangelical leaders, there has been a considerable shift, and it certainly seems like that is due in part to changes in leadership and the growing Hispanic evangelical leadership in evangelical organizations, bringing and raising this issue and making sure that it's at the fore. There's also, of course, as we all know, a broadening of issues that evangelicals are engaging on, right? When we look at the National Association of Evangelicals and for the Health of the Nations, and not that they have moved away from questions of life and marriage, but are expanding the area of focus there. And I think that's very important. You see the NAA in many ways moving more to the center on these questions. And of course, the experiences of being, I mean, many congregations becoming multi-ethnic and these issues being very, very real and present has caused some of the shift in leadership. Amongst the laity, that is far more complicated, as we all know, but I do think there is growing concern within many evangelical congregations how to best deal with this. And when evangelicals are queried, in particular, even white evangelicals are some of the most resistant to reform, when they are queried about comprehensive immigration reform that includes qualifications, even a majority do come behind immigration reform, which is a slight shift, right? But again, they are maybe not as outspoken as some would like, but there is something of a change there, and you've been tracking that even more so.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight, Damaris brought up the fact that there is a national movement among evangelicals. So there is an entity called Evangelical Immigration Table, and it's very encouraging to see because it's made up of people across the spectrum. I mean, the media tend to only focus on the evangelical right, but in this instance, for this issue, you actually see people coming together from all sides. All the main players from the evangelical world are together on this, including, I think, this institution, right? The president of this institution has signed on to that document endorsing a broad statement about reform. On the particulars, I think it's interesting that some of the previous generation evangelicals, I consider myself, the newer generation, that, I've already been versed and grown up in a context where I know I have to expand my agenda. And yes, I am pro-life, but what does it mean to be pro-life? What does it mean to be pro-family? And on this particular issue, I think the previous generation and the newer generation has come together and say, being pro-life and pro-family here means we need to limit the deportations that are splitting families. We need to make sure immigration policy is just and humane. And no matter where people are in their status, we can still affirm the humanity and their dignity and the desire to start families and to provide for the families. And that's something that, as Christians, we could agree on and hope to work together to improve the policy so that these families don't have to be living in fear every day, and that children will still have their parents. Because the status quo is every year there's over 300,000 people being deported, and many of those people are parents of U.S. citizen children. And the implications of that are huge. And what does it mean to be pro-life and pro-family in that instance is something that I think is very encouraging to see the Evangelical Immigration Table and other groups coming together to agree and to really wrestle about.
I think the distinction that Dr. Melkonian made is important between leadership and laity. As I travel around the country and speak, at the national level, you go on websites, every major evangelical denomination pretty much has a statement on immigration, and what interests them is the growth in evangelical immigration churches. And so it's all about leadership training, and they're dealing with issues like, can we ordain an undocumented pastor? Can we hire them? And so there's one kind of discussion going on at the denominational level. At the lay level, I think part of what's helped is immigration or immigrant churches meet in church buildings, and so you're actually bumping into them on the way in or the way out. And bit by bit, some bridge building is getting done. One comment, though, that I think is maybe helpful to think through: evangelicalism has often been pietistic and individualistic, right? You need to make a personal decision for Jesus, which I agree. But that is how often we present the Christian faith. So what happens is, when you get to a social issue, like immigration, what people will do is default to their ideology, Republican or Democrat, and because they've never been trained to process socially or structurally their faith. So the natural default is their ideology. So if you're on the right, this will be the Republican Party's platform. Again, this weekend I was in Indiana at a church, and during a Q&A, they gave me 3 hours to teach on this. The fear that was expressed was they're all going to become Democrats, so this is why we don't want to give immigration reform. And this is what you hear out there. So I'm not going to belabor the point or go into that, but that's the kind of thing that you hear. So again, the distinction between leadership and laity, and to see this not only as a moral issue, but I would say a theological issue. The reaction of the laity is they are the products of our training and our preaching. So we're at fault. And so I would challenge both professors and students. Maybe we need to rethink our faith and truly read reality biblically in all of its totality.
Thank you. You know, what I heard through all four of your comments is that in our own lifetime, we have witnessed a shift towards more engagement, although that shift may be more motivated by the sheer necessity of the numbers and bumping into them on the road, or because they engage us in various capacities in all forms of life. However, there's still some who are not engaged. So the question I want to focus now on, perhaps a lot more theoretical, why should the evangelical church be engaged in immigration reform? Why should I, if I have nothing to gain from it myself, why should I get engaged in pushing our government to push for comprehensive immigration reform?
I will say, because we have enough politicians talking about the issue. We need real Christians involved. That's the bottom line. If you don't want any more Democrats sitting at Congress, you got to develop a community of true Christians who are going to vote as Christians, who are not going to sell their vote just to so-and-so because he talks pretty about the Bible. We need true Christians. And the church has the call and has the capacity to develop those true voting Christians. That would be my point one. And my second point will be, is the human cost. Sam just mentioned about how many people get deported. Every single day, 1,100 people are deported. Every single day. You may not see it here, but we see it in Boston constantly. We see it in Chelsea. We see it in East Boston. So it's the human cost. Your members, those who go to your church, are being separated from their families. Or you have people in your church that you may not pay attention to, but they are carrying ankle bracelets from ICE. So if you're asking me why is the church supposed to get involved, we had enough politicians talking about issues that really concern God.
Yeah, and I would concur. I mean, it's an issue for all. There are grave injustices associated with the law as is, and we're all implicated, right? And I think there absolutely has to be a response. The church is called to love the immigrant, and what that means, obviously, that can be manifested in different ways, but I think we have a responsibility to encourage conversation for folks to think about what it means then to do justice with reference to the immigrant. That doesn't mean that I would be excited about churches saying this is the law that you ought to support, but general foundational principles and understanding, I think, are absolutely crucial.
Mm-hmm.
Two things. One, on a ministry level, knowing that this week it's about missions. Once we, as a church, work together with folks within the church, whether those who are in the same building worshiping together, but we just bump into them between services, or those who are in another denomination or even in another faith. That's the opportunity we have right now in our midst, especially in cities, in gateway cities like Lynn, and big cities like Boston. Churches, immigration is fostering and facilitating the rejuvenation of churches and other faith communities. And the reality of that is that we need to build relationships. And on this issue, we could try to build better coalitions so that over time we can establish ourselves as people that others can trust, and we could speak for them. One of the questions on this list was, how do we avoid being paternalistic? I think on one hand, yes, we as second generation, as Americans, those who have the vote, we should speak for those who don't. And there's a lot of empowering that needs to happen. But at the same time, actually, immigrants are teaching us new things about God, teaching us new things about what God is doing around the world. And they're training us as Americans who most of the time are monolingual. They're teaching us other languages, they're teaching us other customs, preparing us to go to the ends of the earth. And that's an opportunity that we don't want to miss. On a theoretical level, about witness, about a prophetic potential, I think, speaking from someone in my generation, I think we've missed the boat last time around in terms of previous generation. I think on the surface, it was really great that we're able to have all this power. Like one party was relying on us to carry the presidency. We were very influential for one party. But I think that era is over. And I think it's a good thing that we're not going to be able to influence one party on another, because we're forced to now being in the margins and trying to be true to ourselves, and to really be a prophetic voice. Whether you're a Republican Christian or Christian Republican, whether a Christian Democrat, you can speak truth to your respective parties. You can bring in truth and facts, because both sides are misinformed through the media, through partisan politics, through terrible campaign finance. And we as Christians have the opportunity this time around to stand on an issue in a way that is just, that's prophetic, and that's not beholden to one party or another. And hopefully that would speak volumes and really help advance the agenda and not building political power per se.
Well, since this is a seminary crowd, let me give you 3 passages. The first would be Leviticus 19, verse 18, and couple it with verses 33 and 34. We are called to love the neighbor, but in 33 and 34, this neighbor is called the sojourner. So if Jesus says that the true follower loves God and neighbor, which you begin to appreciate if you tie that into its Levitical context, is that loving the immigrant becomes a test of Christian faith. That needs to sink in. 1 Peter 2 tells us, verses 10 and 11, tells us that all of us are sojourners. And so what we learn is that migration is a central metaphor for what it means to be a Christian. So we actually need to get into the discussion to understand our faith. And lastly, Deuteronomy 10, verses 17 to 19, where it says that we are to love the immigrant because God does. I don't know what other motivation we need.
Thank you. I'm sure that there are many other passages or images that come to your mind to motivate us to be engaged in that. As Sam mentioned, paternalistic reaction or motives. Obviously, that's something that we deal with. We feel it, especially those of us who are treated paternalistically. But how can we be engaged in this movement for those who are powerless? Obviously, they have no voice, no vote, and we want to help them. How can we be engaged on their behalf without having an attitude, behaviors that is paternalistic? Mm-hmm. How can we do this?
Once you stop seeing the undocumented as a victim as something dangerous. Once you start seeing the immigrant community as the solution of this issue, once you take into consideration when people are making decisions, their voices, then you are empowering them. In Agencia Alpha, we mobilize people to talk to their congressmen constantly. A month ago, we went to Washington, D.C. with 49 people on a bus. We slept on the bus for 2 nights. I mean, we've done that since 10 years ago. But this is what we do. We bring people to Congress in Washington, D.C., and we bring people to their offices here in Massachusetts. And we just let them know, share your story. Tell them why you moved to the U.S. Tell them why you're asking them for their support. I remember this very last trip when we went, I had a group of 20 people. And we knocked at the door of Congressman Capuano, and his aide said, oh, I'm sorry, we can't see you. And you know, these 20 people slept on the bus the whole night, and they were supposed to sleep the following night in the same bus. And I said, no, you can't do that. No, you know, we travel the whole night just to meet with you. And he said, well, I'm going to meet only with 5. And I said, no, you're meeting with everybody, and you're hearing all their stories. And we did. And when we left that office, the pride and the happiness and the certainty that they did something good from all these families. A little girl, 6 years old, talked to this aide, and she shared her story. Her father is being deported. A 63-year-old mother was sharing her story. Once you let them be part of the solution, you're not overtaking care of them, or overtaking care of us, I should say, because I consider myself one of them. You are just letting us be part of the conversation. You empower a community that is willing to work really hard. If this community was willing to cross the border to almost die for the benefit of their families, don't you think that they will do the same thing for this country once they are accepted and they feel welcome? So just let them be part, empower them.
Oh, that's great. And I would echo that. And I would also say, I mean, this is an issue for all. I think we're all implicated in the law such as it stands. I mean, I think this country has been very dependent for decades, right, on immigrant labor, documented and undocumented. And our government has been very willing, historically we know, to look the other way and to put on a green light, as it were, to invite folks to come here and contribute to our economy and help prop us up. We do have a fertility rate issue problem in this country, right? And so we've been very willing, and then at times politically, when it has seemed prudent for some, they've decided it's a red light now, right? And so, I mean, we've been playing this game for a very long time, and with people's lives, and people who have lived here and contributed for, many of them for decades. So de facto, they have become contributing members of our society, and to continue to work with them and never have opportunity for folks to garner legal status, I think is, again, culpability all around, so.
Ruth brought the point about labor, and I think I wanted to emphasize that because besides being citizens and being voters, we can also engage this process as consumers, as regular people in the marketplace. Whether you're an employer, whether you're just a consumer, all of this is happening with the help of migrant labor, like the system, the machine. You know, like this past week we have government shut down, and right now people are talking about, for example, food inspection being one key area that is lacking. So if government continues to shut down, then our food is going to be in jeopardy. Imagine if you shut down undocumented labor, if you shut down migrant labor, the consequences are even worse. You're not going to get your cheap fruits and vegetables. You're not going to be able to get processed meats. And you know, we're not even talking about global labor in terms of what our products come from, where they come from. And so as consumers, regardless of what you feel about the legislation, what's in place, we can at least advocate for better practices with the people that we interact with in the marketplace. We could advocate for people that we know that work in industries that are ripe with abuse, whether that's the restaurant industry, and also there's a very, very dark side to this, which is human trafficking. And you know, this is all part of migration. You know, people are taking huge risks to cross borders, and once they get here, if they don't have the proper documents, if they are disempowered, and if they can't find appropriate jobs, they're going to fall victim to traffickers and others who are willing to abuse them for their labor. And this is still happening in our midst. It's not just a problem, around the world. So I just want to emphasize that point, that we can also affect change as consumers and as people who are in the marketplace.
I'm watching the clock, and so to avoid being redundant, I'll just pass and we can go to another question.
Yeah. Thank you, Danny. Let's see if I can bring this full circle for ourselves as an audience of women and men engaged in the church and how we can be better engaged. One thing that's most people perhaps don't realize, but there are a lot of men and women serving the church as pastors who are themselves undocumented, or people who in their country of origin were pastors, have overstayed their visa here or enter undocumented, whatever way. They're currently here and serving or attempting to serve. How can the church be proactive in helping those men and women who are obviously growing the Church of Jesus Christ in this country and not here with documents? How can we help them achieve legalized status? Not a good word that I would like to use, but it is what it is. I personally know many pastors in the Boston area in that situation. How can we help people like that?
Really quickly, I'll go back to my story of the chicken. It's about identity. If you are a true Christian, if your call is to be a pastor, and if your call is to pastor other pastors, you got to understand that that's greater, more important than having a social security number. Having a pastor who has been washed by the blood of Christ and has that stamp of Christ in his life. All you got to do is, once a chicken will always be a chicken. So it doesn't matter which country he goes to. The church has to accept them as who they are because that's their identity in Christ. And the church is also responsible to change policies in order to then open the doors for these pastors to obtain a status in the United States and be able to then keep on working as pastors. But I think the key is identity. Sometimes we forget that we're Christians, and being Christians is greater than being a person from any country. Being a Christian is greater than being a Guatemalan and being an American.
Yeah, I think we need to be very realistic here. We have to distinguish pastor training from pastor hiring. Under current U.S. legislation, you cannot hire an undocumented immigrant to be a pastor. The only way a citizen, not the only way, but one of the only ways a citizen can break current U.S. immigration laws if you hire them. So the discussion that is going on at denominational levels is how can we recompense these pastors without having to hire them legally, because if we do, we will lose our tax-exempt status. So that's a very different kind of discussion. Again, it's the pragmatics on the ground. The other piece that you see with pastors is they can come in on religious visas, the R1. That is a 5-year visa, renewable, but you need to be sponsored. And what has happened is that some will come in under one sponsorship and then split a church and try to go on their own. Once they do that, they're out of status and they are here illegally. Sadly, again, I'll just be very honest. A lot of people will come to do ministry here from mixed motives. Talking to an immigration lawyer in Denver, and I'm pro-immigrant, so I'm just going to be honest. We got to get past the idealized stage. The largest incidence of fraud in this country are the religious visas.
Yeah, true.
And we need to own that.
Mm-hmm.
Some pastors come because they can make more money here than they can in their in their country of origin, and we need to just be honest with that. So we've got to balance identity with current law, and then be very, very realistic about sometimes the motives behind the R1 process. So just a realistic picture. Let's get past the rhetoric and get on the ground, and you'll begin to see how complicated this can be.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to turn it over to you. If some of you have some questions or some comments to address, you can address it generally, or if you have a specific question to a specific member of our panel, just address them by their name. There are 2 microphones floating around, so just raise your arm, and someone over here.
I don't know exactly what the question is, but one thing that came to my mind was the use of the term illegal immigrants. That is a true statement legally. Someone is here legally, so they're illegal. But we also know that word's been used in derogatory fashion in the media, in different settings. And so how do we not sugarcoat it, not trying to avoid it, but stay true to the fact that, okay, there are people amongst us who are here illegally, but how do we not label them? For example, I was here late and probably speeded, and I didn't get caught, but if I was caught, I would have gotten a civil violation, and that's similar to someone who is undocumented. But for me, as someone who violated traffic law, I'm not always deemed as an illegal driver, and I'm not always carrying that label with me. And so I think that's one thing that we can be careful about. Yeah, should we use the word undocumented? Should we use illegal immigrant? Should we avoid from that? Should we use other terms like unauthorized? So that's something that we can be careful about, and not to be overly politically correct, but also be aware that it could be used in a negative way that hurts people.
I think, too, we need to watch language games. Besides the illegal piece, I would add the word alien. It doesn't work in Spanish, but in English it does. I mean, you could use that for outer space creatures. And so I mentioned this yesterday in chapel, right? When does an alien become a human being? I mean, this is what we need to... So avoid that label. The other label I would say to avoid, because it's not true, is amnesty. No one in the immigration movement that's responsible is talking about amnesty. The Senate bill would be a 13-year process. But that's the label. Amnesty was Reagan in 1986. It's not the Senate bill of 2013. So I think, whoever wins the language game will carry the media. So we need to be vigilant about the language that we use.
There are also, I would add, a number of concerns about those who are here without documentation, creating an economic injustice concern, a problem for those who might compete with them for jobs or resources and so on, that they might contribute to a depression of wages, right, and loss of jobs. So I think that can be true, but not all of it is true, right? And so there's really good data and analysis that shows how very complicated this situation is, right? And how many of the immigrants, of course, coming to the U.S. are fulfilling particular niches within our labor pool that aren't filled elsewhere, right, at the upper and lower tiers. And so I think some of that conversation may be genuine and some is intentionally misleading.
Any question?
I would have loved us to probably have somebody who has a totally different opinion in this panel. What I'm saying is somebody who is against what we are talking about, to give us his own reasons why they will stand against immigration. Because Dr. Danny has already given us a little of the other side of it, which we may not really see. But I think that what we are talking about is just more than receiving, accepting, and helping the immigrants. An adage goes this way: teach a man how to fish, he will never come back to you again for fish. one of the major reasons why we see this movement happening is because the people coming from where they are coming, their countries, they are suffering. There is great poverty. If things are going on well, they are not likely to move. I seem to believe that the countries who have advanced in technology, in industrialization, have turned a blind eye to those countries where people are suffering. So if we just keep on saying, come, we receive you, we will help you, everybody will want to come. So I seem to be of the opinion that we should not only push to help the immigrants, to receive them and help them, but also push the government to see how can a nation like America help those countries to rise from the rubble. I served in North Africa for about 10 years, and I witnessed a lot of sub-Saharan Africans coming to Morocco seeking to go to Europe. Initially, I was very hard on them. I preached hard messages. But later, over the years, I changed because I saw they were suffering. Many of them have invaded Europe, France, Spain, Italy. Why? These countries from where they are coming, they are rich in mineral resources. But their countries these riches are being stolen. These countries have no stable government, so multinational companies who are there are stealing the riches from those countries. So these people have no other life. So what other option do they have? Is to leave. So beyond helping migrants, I think the evangelical churches in the West should do something more than that. How could you prompt your governments to help those countries to rise from their rubble, build their nation, and you will see that it will change. We will change it. So it's beyond migration. The problem is deeper than what we envisage. Thank you.
Danny, you want to respond to
Yeah,
that?
I would say a few things, and I agree. I think one of the part of the myopia of this country is we think this is a U.S. problem. It's a global issue. The cheap labor in Argentina is Paraguayan, Peruvian, and Bolivian labor. And this is a global phenomenon. So you really can't engage migration ultimately until you begin to process the world economic system. Having said that, I would make two other comments, and then I know Dr. Melkonian, this is your area, so please jump in. But I would say two things. One is some of the rhetoric you heard in Latin America, which at that time was truer than it is today, is the multinationals were from the West. That is changing. One of the largest donors into Guatemala are the Japanese. The multinationals are now multinational. They're not Western. That kind of imperialist talk was the talk of the 80s. I think we're actually in a new environment that complicates that. The other thing that I would say, living in Latin America as long as I did, is that it is not only the multinationals, it is a culture of corruption to its core. And so we can talk about Zimbabwe, but you can't talk about Zimbabwe without Mugabe and the corruption of an 80-year-old man who just got reelected with his cronies. And so the corruption is not only international, it's national and it's cultural. So the issues are just getting more complicated. So they're economic and they're cultural and it's global. So you're right. But again, I'm just complicating it even more. You want to add to that?
No, I concur, and I think there are some who, quite frankly, advocate for just overall labor mobility as a response to global poverty, and in some ways that can be just a means of evading deeper issues, right, and deeper responsibilities that we have globally. to address. So that is fair. I also think, I mean, when we look at the particular case of the United States and much of our immigration flow and our relationship with Mexico, many would say we have set ourselves up by engaging in a free trade arrangement with Mexico and Canada where there are such grave inequities without dealing with and including labor as part of that agreement, without investing significantly in our trade partners. Of course, the EU is a different institution, but of course with its expansion and when it brings in newer members, particularly when there are economic inequities, there's serious investment therein. And so we are reaping some of what we've sown.
So you have all been involved in some level, some for 5 years, some for 10, some for 20 in this, and each one of you at some point in this moderation has said, well, it's complicated. So for the people who are here who are saying, yeah, I really think that I want to get involved in this, where do we start? What's a place that you trust to just inform ourselves on the issues? Because there is so much rhetoric out there. There is a fight for the definition of terms. There is a fight. So if we're looking to just say, yeah, I really feel like I should do something, I'm not sure exactly what would you recommend to someone saying, where do I go to get educated? Where do I start in the process of engaging myself with the immigration efforts?
I would like to say, we understand that we're not going to change a federal policy if we don't start at the local level. So you start at your local level. There are many organizations, yes, they're not Christian, but there are many organizations in your community that are working on behalf of immigration reform. The best idea will be just to go and sit in one of their meetings. They have meetings constantly, and you will join then the actions of those organizations that you feel comfortable with. At the state level, obviously, I can tell you we have Alpha in Boston, but that would be selfish of me. There are many other organizations in Massachusetts that they are doing the same type of work that we are doing. And if you just go to one of their meetings, then you start getting connected. That's how we started 11 years ago, thinking that we were just going to be part of a hearing. And then all of a sudden, we had mobilized thousands, and we've been able to kind of change some of the policy at the state level. Right now, at the state level, there are 2 or 3 specific campaigns that are taking place. One is a safe drive issue, where it's not only about providing a license to undocumented people, but it's also about protecting the streets. So get informed about that. Google that information. There is also another Massachusetts Trust Act that is asking the community to help the immigrant community and the police officers to gain trust again. So at the state level, there are many, many things that you can do. Just visit one of your organizations or get in touch with Agencia Alpha. We might be able to guide you through, depending on the city that you're living at. But just go out, meet people.
I'd recommend Dr. Carroll's book. Go ahead.
Thanks for the commercial. I would think that there needs to be a distinction between involvement in advocacy and involvement at local church level, which may be kind of what you're getting at. I think there's several ways at a local church level. There are curricula that have been printed for churches, and I would be happy to pass that information on to Dr. Padilla. Educational pieces like for Sunday schools, prayer guides, because most people, that's about what they can do. I mean, they're working and have kids, and they don't have time to be involved in advocacy, but they can pray, and they can vote, and they can begin to understand their Bible. Another thing that I've seen in local churches, which I think is very helpful, and as I travel the country is what I've seen, is something like ESL. Now you're engaged in immigrant face-to-face, and this has been a major mover in terms of changing views. Another one is after-school tutoring, and local churches can do this. VBS in neighborhoods, partnering with the immigrant church that meets in your church in the afternoon. So these are the kind of things that the kind of regular layperson has the time and the energy for. So I think we need to work at multiple levels. I mean, one level would be the advocacy, another level would be the straight political, another level would be denominational, another level would be local churches, and we have to be working at all of those. I think one of the things that's helpful is to understand what one's particular role is. You know, Hermana Damaris, la paisana, you know, her, and she's passionate. We need passionate people. This is her Latin blood, too.
That's true.
We need
It's the
advocates.
black beans.
Yeah. You know, we need the advocacy. You know, what I learned early on, because I wanted to be everywhere all the time doing everything, is that I learned, and I continue to learn, is that my slice is the educational slice. I don't have the time for anything else. I have a job. So I think part of it, once you do get involved, is to understand your slice of it and realize that you're part of a larger movement. One of the things Sam mentioned, and I would encourage you to go to, is the Evangelical Immigration Table, oneword.org. Another one is ChristiansForImmigrationReform.org, or if you type
Comprehensive Immigration Reform.
yeah. What was it again?
CCIR, Christians for Comprehensive Immigration
Right.
Reform.
Yeah, and there's all kinds of sub-websites, you know, once you kind of get into the black hole, you can find them. So I think, you know, my answer would be multi-pronged without, you know, if you're trying to win the majority culture on this, you don't do it with guilt and drive them away. We must be winsome and give them space.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, she is quick.
Any other questions?
Could I also point to some other resources? Matthew Sorens and Jenny Wang have a very kind of easy primer on this, welcoming the stranger, looking at kind of the history of immigration and why Christians perhaps could respond in this particular way. In addition to Christians at the border, I think that's a helpful first cut. I also think that if we want to look to the Catholics on this, the U.S. Catholic Conference of Bishops, they've got some great resources, and there have been some really kind of, there's been thoughtful social and political thinking on this question for some time, and I think this concerns over what does it mean to have a right to migrate as well as the right of nations to establish borders. I think they've been dealing with that in a complex, effective way for some time.
The Lutherans, too. Lutherans, Missouri Synod. They have a 60-page booklet on immigration, and they process it Lutheranly. I don't know if that's a word. We can say these words in Spanish. Right? You can make up words in Spanish and it works. But they think Lutheranly through the two kingdoms, which is fascinating, which gets to what you're saying about borders and things like that. There's a lady in the back.
So it's not within the realm of the evangelical world. It's more of a policy question, but I can certainly talk to you privately if I need to. So I do a few things. I run a nonprofit organization for women in the sex industry, and I also work for the Salvation Army in a daycare center for homeless children in Cambridge. And within that realm, my eyes have really been open to the issue of immigration, which in a way they have not been before, so that's good. But I meet a lot of moms within the daycare who are receiving cash benefits, they are receiving food stamps, they're in subsidized housing, but they can't work because they're here without documentation. I have trouble understanding how that can be and how that's helpful. You know what I mean? Because it's always circular. They can't do any better than this bar, which is unfortunate. And I have been hitting my head against the wall about how to get them proper documentation or help them step into a place of employment. So there's that question. I don't know if you could answer or help speak to or point me to the right resources. But to the trafficking piece, as mentioned earlier, and I'm sure you meant this as well, it's not that people are coming here and then without a job, so then they're trafficked. That does happen, but people are being trafficked purposely here to the U.S. as labor and sex traffic victims. And in particular, I go to a strip club in Chelsea to work with women. All the women there only speak Portuguese. They do not know English. They are from Brazil. There's no way that's not a trafficking issue. And I was told later it's because they did favors for lawyers in Brazil who then produce for them the correct documents they need to be here. But now they don't have any of the resources or tools to succeed here. So that's just a side piece I wanted to speak to that's on my heart, clearly. And then the other piece is, can you help me?
Damaris already talked about this, which is the key to for local advocacy. I think the issues you addressed in terms of access to benefits and kind of this circle of poverty that people get stuck in. Obviously, for people who are undocumented, counter to popular belief, they're actually not eligible to a lot of benefits, including healthcare, including childcare subsidies. So if they do get childcare subsidies, it's maybe because of a loophole or something. But on paper, if you are undocumented, you're not eligible to a lot of things. Could be an instance where the child is a U.S. citizen, then the child is eligible for food stamps, the child is eligible for obviously enrolling in school. So there's a lot of complicated kind of intersection between immigration status and access to public benefits, and I could be a resource for you. And then on the trafficking piece, I think this is one thing that the bills, the Senate bill and the current versions in the House hasn't really addressed adequately, in my opinion, is that the whole low-wage worker visas. And right now, the status quo is there is not enough, and employers have incredible power over workers. And also, in terms of cross-border trafficking, recruiters are using this situation to pretty much misinform and mislead potential workers. You know, they tell them, oh, I have a job in the U.S., you can come work. But obviously, because of our immigration law, there isn't a lot of jobs that you can come here to work legally in unless we have reform. So in the absence of reform, these issues are going to happen more and more. And it's unfortunate that it's happening, and I'm glad you're working with this issue and with this population, but this just adds to the case for more labor protections within immigration reform and also immigration reform as a whole to really happen. And that, if in the absence of that, those abuses are always going to happen.
I would just add that for the trafficking victims, there are two visas that can help them. The VAWA and the U visa. These were created for victims of domestic violence and for victims of any crime. You can easily Google that information, or but these victims can resolve their immigration status by showing enough proof that they've been victims of in this case, this trafficking issue. When it comes to policy, that's why it is so important for us to get involved at the state level too, not only to focus on the federal level, because as Sam was saying, it is very complex, but a person who does not have any documents has no right to receive any benefits from the federal or state level, unless it has a child who is a citizen, and then in those terms they get some restricted benefits. But that's why we need to help to change these policies.
Thank you so much. We've run out of time. Why don't you join me in thanking our panel for their time and expertise. And I pray that all of us get involved in some manner or another in immigration reform and caring for those among us. May the Lord bless you the rest of this day. Thank you.